Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mafalda, and with Francesco we have an architectural office here in Syracuse. I'm not going to be very long. We had a very nice year with Formafantasma curating the event that is now culminating in the first week of the end of the workshops. And we have the pleasure to welcome Beatriz and Mark sitting here in front of me, and Jan. They will start the lectures this afternoon, then we'll have a small break, and then we will hear the workshop leaders that are sitting on the row over there. I would like just to say a few words about Beatriz and Mark. Beatriz Colomina is a Spanish professor of history of architecture at Princeton University. She writes, curates on questions of design, art, sexuality, and media. Her last book is called X-ray Architecture, that she might talk about it. Thank you for being here. I know it was difficult to fit in our schedule, but we are happy that some other events happened close by and that you are here with us today. Mark Wigley is a professor of architecture at Columbia University. He's a historian and theorist who explores interaction, intersection of architecture, art, philosophy, culture, and technology. His most recent exhibition, The Human Insect, Antenna Architectures 97-2017, was on show at the Institute in 2008 last year. And his most recent book is Cutting Molecular, an architecture investigation last year. So I welcome both of you on this stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We are super happy to be here and be part of this great event. And you know, Jessica was doing this in this kit, but we are extremely happy to be here with you.
Yeah, and I think this question of welcome is super urgent and super important. So for us, it's really a privilege to be here with you. Also to learn that Archimedes was the inventor of air conditioning. We didn't know.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, and we were asked to talk about Are We Human? And you may know that this is the theme of a biennale that we created together, I think it's 3 years ago, in the third Istanbul Design Biennial. Our main point there is that everything is design from the moment you wake up in the morning to the whole planet.
So I guess the idea was, I mean, how do you make an exhibition about design if today we are ourselves being designers? Right? It's tricky. We thought, okay, maybe you should make an exhibition which is like a kind of a mirror. So actually what's really on display is not like objects of design, but the human being that enters into the gallery. So this was the kind of mission. So we tried to make a kind of a portrait. And that's what you saw before. All these images were our kind of basic portrait of the human species. This is not weird stuff, this is us, or to say it another way around, we are very weird.
Here is the manifesto that we prepared, a kind of polemical manifesto with 8 propositions and asking people, that's what we did for the Biennale, from a very wide range of disciplines, not just designers, but philosophers, activists, architects, archaeologists, etc., to somehow react to these propositions and respond to them in some way. Our main point was that design is always, or it always presents itself as serving the human, but its real ambition is to redesign the human. And I'm going to give you an example, a very simple example of how this happened. We know that shoes are, of course, very important. Here is some footprints of Neolithic inhabitants of what is now called Istanbul, about 8,500 years ago, that were discovered when they were digging for the new subway. You can see from the smooth surface or outline of this feet that is actually not an imprint of a foot, but it's an imprint of a shoe. So it's an imprint already of human technology. Shoes actually transform the capacity, behavior, and even the skeleton of humans. The human was redesigned by the shoe. Rudowski in the 40s, an Italian, of course you will know that Lars Rudowski, Italian, immigrated to the United States, etc., criticized the typical Western man's shoe. Of course, he criticized all the women's shoe, but I mean, I think the men is in a way more interesting because we know already that women's shoes destroy their feet. But it's interesting that he also focused on the typical Oxford shoe and argued that if we keep going that way, we will end up developing a victim in the people. So, of course, the moment that we start working with shoe, our skeleton started to transform. And we became a different person. So that's a simple example of how design redesigns also the human. The moment we have shoes, we are different already. We start to be different. And here is a footprint of Neil Armstrong on the moon. And of course, the 50th anniversary, so very present in all of us right now. Made possible, of course, this first footprint in the moon by a massive technological apparatus. So only humans, in fact, could make themselves a shoe and then send themselves up to the moon. Design is what makes us, rather than the other way around.
Okay, so just to say some things, and in a way you are the experts of design, right? And we are very interested to see what the workshops have been thinking about it. And I kind of love the fact that the projector is flickering because the adapter is feeling very hot in Sicily, right? So we are flickering and you are flickering, and it also means all the things that we're saying about design become a little bit tentative, like we are not sure. And I think it's actually super good, you already said in your introduction, to ask questions. And we definitely had this idea that always design is supposed to provide answers, right? If you're a really good designer, you say like, look at my answer. And it's annoying, right? Because all the artists, they get to ask questions and be philosophical and thoughtful, and designers are supposed to be servants of the economy, which means design exhibitions become like trade shows, right? So we thought, what if it's the other way around? What if design is a way to ask questions, right? And so everything, so imagine design was flickering. You know, you have your Aldi Rossi coffee pot and it sort of flickers, right? They go, oh, what is that? Anyway, our species is completely surrounded by endless layers of design, right? And I'll show you like the brain, right? When you think, you change the design of the inside of your head. So it's not like your brain says and projects design to the outside world. The outside world is changing the shape of your brain. But this picture is not very different from the picture of this room. If you look at this room, it's an entire environment. It's a total world of design. It means that when you're in this room, you're in the town hall, you're in design, you're in control, you're in representations. You're not really in Sicily. You're in the world of design. So design is exactly what is always what the human species is wearing. And if you know anything about clothes, like Beatriz was saying about shoes, what you wear is what you are. So if we wear design, then we are ourselves design. So it's not so much in the question of the human as a designer. So for example, if you look down on the planet, has been designed, right? Which is of course not necessarily a good thing. If you think of just the way the ships move, right? Really the whole planet is covered with design. If we take away all of the landmass and just look at the interconnections, the way we move with ships and airplanes, you can see New Zealand really well, which is where I'm from. Why can you see it so well? It's not very important, right? Ships come and bang into the edge of it and then go away. Europe disappears because it's just complete web of communication. Of course, we much more live in this web, this design web, than we live, let's say, on a landscape. If you lift yourself up and look down, of course, you're looking at design. So when we say that our species is surrounded by design, we really mean surrounded. By the way, if you were coming from Mars, like if you were an alien, and I have friends almost certainly come from another planet, when do you think they would meet the human, right? They wouldn't kind of come down on Earth and shake hands with us. The first encounter with the human would be junk, right? And they're not going to say, they're not going to say, oh, look at this junk. I wonder which species made this. They're going to say, look at this species. How interesting, it's full of all this metal. And when they would land on Earth, they would not walk up to us and say, hello. They would probably go into our genome, into our DNA and say, interesting, interesting. And here's maybe a little spaceship that most of you will wear at some point, a little artificial valve for your heart floating inside your body. So it's not just your inside design is inside you. Maybe this is our biggest accomplishment, right? This is the ozone hole. to which all of us have spent, 200 years or so to make this absolutely perfect circle. Of course, we're afraid of this, but could be that we're also a little bit proud to be the species that is able to be so stupid.
The human, in fact, may be the only species to have systematically designed not only the extinction of many other species, but its own extinction. Here you have this poor bird, for example, death by eating so much plastic. In a way, you can say death by design. So, in a way, to say very briefly, the Biennale tried somehow to reboot the conversation by thinking about rethinking the intimate relationship between design and the human. And the project, of course, here we have is a question mark for us. It was always a question mark. Are we human, right?
Yeah, and the project keeps going, and maybe it keeps going in this room today. There were many kind of conferences and events, and we...
Korea, in Britain, I don't know where.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, we hate biennales. Biennales are a total nightmare. Very good places to meet friends and to drink Prosecco. By the way, think of Venice, for example. How much Prosecco goes to the lagoon, through the bodies, and back into the lagoon again. Right? Just passing through. The fish are waiting for the Biennale. And why the Biennale is every 2 years? So that everybody sees a little bit of the future, but they all see the same future, so we all sing the same song at the same time. So the purpose of the Biennale is to synchronize the entire global discourse to make sure everybody's saying the same thing, which means actually it's a way that we don't think, right? That we don't experiment. So the way we did this Biennale is make a list of everything we hate about Biennales and then systematically undo them. So one thing we hate is catalogs. Catalogs where you invite your friends to write an essay that take advantage of the situation. We say, no, okay, no catalog essay. Every artist represents themselves, and we invite 50 people to contribute to a second book. Then there was conferences on superhumanity. It just kept going because we hate 2 years.
Yeah.
Right? So the project started a year before, and it still goes today.
So today we thought that we will somehow connect to your project here in Siracusa by pulling somehow out some threads from this little yellow book. So as Mark was saying, with Biennale, we get the idea of the catalog with a number of experts that somehow all of a sudden have all this authority over the work. In the Biennale, we decided that the artists, the architects, the designers, the philosophers that were contributing to the Biennale were perfectly capable of writing about their own work, and they wrote about their own work in the catalog, which is that silvery catalog that we don't have here. And we decided to put all our thoughts that we have in the preparation of the Biennale, during the making of the Biennale, in this little book, Are We Human?, that we have here, and that we will somehow pull some threads to connect to your topic. These are some of the themes that were in the Biennale, and what we're going to do, Mark is going to present the human is the designing animal, and I'm going to present good design is an anesthetic.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a bad experience for you, because the thing we hate the most about Biennales is curators. Right, the curator. So precisely we thought the curator should say nothing in the exhibition, and so we put all of our own shit into this little book. Right, so it's very small, but I can tell you there's a lot of shit in there. So now we read to you from this book, so you are the victims. We hate curators, we hate ourselves, now we read you only ourselves. Right? Okay, so I do a little bit from the beginning on the theme of the plastic human. And I suppose, let's say the main kind of idea is that usually we think about design as being something that's sort of in your head and then it goes into the world. And maybe the way you work on it in the world changes the way that you do it in the head. But basically it gets thrown out. Even we use the word project, right? Like projecto. We were trying to argue a little bit the opposite, that actually we have no idea what we're doing. And we then sometimes do something that we think is good, and then retroactively we call it design. So actually design is is a word you use to explain something that happened that you don't know how it happened, as a way of kind of claiming that you are an author of the object, but maybe the object is really the author of you, right? So it's a kind of reverse. What if design is what makes the human, not the human is what makes design. Or to say it another way, designed artifacts, things that have design, let's say, have as much agency as the animal that made it, and the human is absolutely animal. We seem to know what we're doing, but perhaps we don't. We are transformed as animals. We are a different kind of animal because of these objects. Or to say it another way around, the body and the brain of the human become, let's say, artifacts in design. I mean, this is a perfectly normal human hand with hair amputated and so on. This is a kind of a documentary image. What is human in the end is the strange relationship with objects. The human, for sure, is inseparable from the objects that it produces. And in fact, you could even say that the human body has the extended shape of all of these different objects. So in another sense, when the Martian hits the junk, it is exactly hitting the beginning of the human body. But also, much more importantly, the human kind of emerges in the change of capacity produced by these objects. In fact, you could argue, and it's in the afternoon and you're a little bit woozy, like these images, we are suggesting that, in fact, the design objects are more human than the human. Right? If you think of the qualities that we associate with the human, actually these are qualities of objects. This means that designers are never simply operating with kind of human intentions and abilities. Their objects are also kind of openings or questions in the human capacity. Let me show you two British men. And I know you think that all British men are boring. And I think actually that's reasonably scientifically true. But here are two British men. It's May 26th and June 2nd of 1859. The one on the left is a geologist, Joseph Prestwich, and the one on the right is an archaeologist, John Evans. So it's kind of a couple between geology and archaeology. They gave matching papers in London to the scientific elite of the Royal Society and the Society of Antiquity. So basically the smartest people in London, the people that really thought they knew. And the lecture was about this object, right? And you look at this object, you probably say, oh yeah, I know what that is. That's a hand axe. That's kind of like very, very old. It's at the beginning. It's the beginning of technology, maybe even the beginning of humanity. What they said was that these objects that have this kind of teardrop shape, that had been found alongside the bones of mammals known to have been extinct long before the human arrived, were in fact human. And the reason that these objects are human is that they have evidence of design. So basically these guys in the 19th century are making an argument that this object has design. Because it has design, it's a human object because humans are the species that design, right? They say, for example, there is a uniformity of shape, like a clarity of the outline, a correctness of the outline, and a sharpness about the cutting edges and points, which cannot be due to anything other than design. So they're saying, like, it's obvious, design, right? Now these objects were even produced by what Prestwich called blows applied by design. So somebody sat with a stone, one stone, and banged another stone to produce this object, and each blow was a kind of act of design. So instead of designing by like drawing an object, you sort of draw it by actually making it. Since they were found in geological layers with bones of animals that had died out long before the human was supposed to arrive. You know, every religion super disagrees about everything, except they almost all agreed on how old was the human species. It was supposed to be 3,000 years. Right? Everybody's in agreement. But if this is a human object, then humans come from much earlier than 3,000 years. So this was a very scandalous claim to make. There was this new kind of alliance between geology and archaeology, which had literally repositioned the human culture within geology itself. In other words, they find these objects deep in the ground. They say, deep. You dig deep in the ground and say, I found the human. Here's the evidence of the human. They detail the evidence of human inventiveness in the absence of any human remains, right? There are no human bodies, bones, just objects, right? It's like digging down and finding an Aldo Rossi coffee pot, like in the layers of the 1970s. And then you go like, aha, humans were there. I don't have Rossi, but I have the coffee pot, therefore I have the human. What's interesting is, since you find in the earth evidence of the human, then in a certain way, it's a kind of archaeology of the mind, like you're sort of digging into the possibility of the human. Now, Prestwich he said, look, his argument does not depend on the evidence of skill. It has nothing to do with the fact that this is a really well-made object. Like, it's not like you're really good with stones, and if you're really good with stones, you must be a human. It's the evidence of design. In other words, these objects were not just made, they were thought. In other words, what makes this object unlike any other object is that it was produced by thought. It is thought. It's kind of like thinking in action. Now, the archaeologists, when they make the lecture, they're holding this object in their hand. By the way, they're very heavy, these things, right? And they would stare obsessively at it. When they held it, they could feel the way it changed their own bodies. They could feel how it worked. They presumably were arguing that they were human, right? Which is a super controversial claim, but they were sort of saying, like, I'm a human, and I'm holding this object, and I think this object is made for me, and it's made for me to do something in the world, and therefore it's evidence of the human. They felt the weight and they felt the transformation of their body, and they imagined themselves as primitive. They imagined themselves as the first humans, as if imagining the birth of humanity in the birth of technology. By the way, almost everybody that looks at this object says, like, oh, that's when technology begins. It's when we're no longer running around, but we're having some kind of access to some kind of leverage. Now, they didn't say it, they didn't have to say it, but their reading of this object depends absolutely on the idea that the human is a designer. In other words, they basically, what they never say is, humans can design, so if I find design, I found a human. It goes like, it's as if we all already agree. Now, evidence that these kinds of objects are shaped by man's art and devices, they put it, completely overturned, revolutionized the sort of self-image of humanity. Until then, religion was, as I said before, super clear about that. Now begins is what is referred to as prehistory. Finally, we have now a kind of history before the history. The human was suddenly super old. Now, it was only 6 months later, and these are the kind of drawings of those objects. 6 months later, Charles Darwin publishes his famous book, On the Origins of Species by Means of Natural Selection. This is the one you know, right? This is the super controversial book that embraced the idea that humans were super ancient, but more radically rejected the idea that any organism, including the human, had been designed by some kind of God, some kind of divine intelligence. The scandalous argument of Darwin was the only reason that we look, like, for example, his example is the eye. The only reason the eye looks so amazingly designed and so perfectly adjusted to its performance is precisely because there is no design there. It's just millions of minute variations over millions of time, age and ages. So all this kind of accidents produce this seemingly non-accidental design. The human eye is the product of millions of minute variations in millions of minute elements over millions of years. So this is a super big revolution. On the one hand, the archaeologists are saying, hey, human is really old. On the other hand, Darwin is saying, we are the kind of product of mutation. This changed everybody's thinking about biology and technology, and these revolutions were super linked together. By the way, Darwin even speculated that if you would use tools, like if the human starts to use tools, and this follows exactly Beatriz's argument about the shoes, that eventually the human body will change because certain bodies will be good at using those tools, and therefore certain bodies will be selected by accident, and we will become, in a way, designed by tools. This thought, by the way, was proved only in 2013 by the discovery of this hand. And this hand, which is 335,000 years old, is super good for holding a stone and super good for climbing a tree. So it's evidence of the hand has reshaped itself with their evolution to be kind of good with tools. Okay, why is it so good? There's this little bone in there. And if, by the way, if you want to throw a stone at somebody, and you know almost everybody does at some point, I mean, of course, not in Sicily. Everybody's always been historically incredibly non-violent. This little bone has a little kind of kink in it, and that enables you to grip and throw, right? Now, what's sort of super fascinating is if you find this bone, and there is the bone, and it's sitting in that person's hand exactly as it would be. This is found in a part of Africa, which is famously the part of Africa in which the oldest stone tools are found. What's happening with archaeology is that every year evidence of the human restructuring itself through the use of tools gets older and older and older. But the crucial point is that the human can actually change the shape of its own organism. Like when we talk about cyborgs and reinventing things and designing our children and all of this stuff, we think we're being so cool. I mean, every generation thinks we are so cool. We are so dangerously modern. But super modern and super cool was to use stone tools to revolutionize the capacity of the body and the brain. Right, so this is kind of just a kind of fact of the situation. Now, what was the sort of turning point in the conversation? The turning point was the discovery of these stones. So you're looking at the stones on which the whole argument about design is being carried out. And they're kind of beautifully drawn, as you can see, and drawn in plan and section. But the main and key photograph is this one. And basically you have the two British guys standing in a deep hole in France, and they're pointing to an object you can't see. It's a stone sticking out of the wall. And what's crucial about this, and it's one of the first uses of photography in sort of scientific evidence, is that in the wall they're showing that this stone has the thick end in the wall and the thin end out, which means it's not being planted, it's not a fake. It's an existing stone. It's surrounded by bones with mammal, and actually it's not a very good hand axe. You can see it's not really well made. This is the one they take back to London. Literally the following day, they go back to London in order to declare that it's true. Because up until then, these objects that were thought to be just weird objects, thought to come from aliens. There was a lot of theory in scientific circles that they came from aliens, or they came from lightning strikes, like lightning would strike stone and would break into all of these pieces. In fact, Darwin was so skeptical, because by the way, these stones were usually found like in the hundreds. Like you don't just find one, you find like 100, and there's no evidence that they've ever been used. In fact, Darwin said at the beginning, if humans were making these objects, then humans would have done nothing other than make these objects. And you know what's weird is, it seems to be that's the exact case. Because by the way, these objects are really not good tools. They're super useless. They're not good for killing animals. They're very hard to hold. A symmetrical stone is not a good tool. It's a good looking tool. Right? And this is the key. The whole point is so-called sexual selection. In other words, you're attracted to something that's beautiful, not because it works very well. So it turns out that these hand axes are super not good at tools, but they're super good for sex, and sex is super good for the survival of the species. By the way, we made these objects the same way for 1.3 million years. Right? It's not about design, it's not about like, how could I make a better stone? It's like making exactly the same stone again and again and again. So first principle would be something that looks like it works, actually doesn't work. Right? And something that doesn't look like it works, for example, these painted marine shells, which are decoration, right? And by the way, this is super masculine, super feminine, right? Man, the tool maker, woman, the wearer of decoration. These tools are language, right? They're painted, they're decoration. These are ways of communicating. These are the first media. This is a way of communicating to people who live on the other side of the hill, people who would recognize you a little bit and only get to know you because of this tool system. This is another way to have sex, by the way. Right? If you can be communicating with people over the hill, then you can have sex with people over the hill. If you have sex with people over the hill, they can have sex with the people over the next hill and over the next hill. And after a while, the human species is actually one kind of huge sexual machine, which is also therefore a thinking machine, because the humans have the ability to pass ideas across the landscape and through generations. Right? And this is the trick. So to summarize, what's amazing about the human is, yes, as we already said here, the human is the designing species. But that doesn't mean that we sort of sit there, go to architecture school or design school, do beautiful drawings, do renderings, and then make it. The great defining feature of the human species is that we are the only species that makes things that don't work. Right? Think about it. If you teach a bird how to get a worm out of a tree with a little stick, it'll do that for the next million years. Right? A human, the next afternoon, you're already thinking, what if I shake the tree? So we make huge amounts of stuff that doesn't work. And we make so much stuff that doesn't work that every now and then it does work. And so when it does work, we say, look at us. Like, look what we've got. So this is, of course, an amazing thing. So we're basically prototyping things that don't work, Which things that don't work are things that you don't know what they could do, and when they can do something, you say, oh, that's what it could do. So we make a lot of stuff for which we don't know what it could do, and if we don't know what it can do, then it can really do something that we didn't know it could do. And if it does something we didn't know it could do, then we can invent that thing and say we can do that thing. So the human becomes this unbelievable species that eventually can design our own body, planet, and so on. In other words, this incredible capacity to design comes from a kind of playfulness with objects. And when we make the object, we kind of look at it strangely. We think, I made this, but what is it that I made? And in the moment of trying to understand what we made, we remake ourselves, right? This is the sort of thought. So just to give you a sense, this is the oldest one found so far, 3.3 million years old. By the way, that means that whatever you think of as human is really operating 3.3 million years ago. That's a time in which there are many other species long before in parallel to Homo sapiens. Then 1.4 million years ago, we were still doing more or less the same thing, and in exactly the same place as those stones were coming from. Now this farmer is able to use a cell phone in order to decide when to operate in that way. So we have reached this situation where, in a certain sense, we hold the world in our hands. We are killing the world, as Beatriz said. We are rendering ourselves extinct. We are kind of in a criminal relationship to each other and to almost every other species on the planet and the planet itself. By the way, it's not so clear that the planet cares. If you talk to insects, they don't really have a very big opinion about the humans because we only just arrived like a million years ago. Right? We're really the new kids on the block and we're about to leave. But we have kind of covered the planet with all of these kind of instruments of detection and operation and scanning and so on. And finally we produce an object like this, so much like the original hand axe, so much trying to look beautiful, so much we are now inside this phone more than this phone is inside our hand. We don't want to know the inside of this thing. This thing is extending us. We became insects probably with the beginning of radio. This is the inside of the antenna of that insect, of that bee, right? And you go closer and closer, the antenna is actually incredibly complex confusion of inside and outside. It's sort of having sex with itself. It's getting to your theme of welcome. It's the ultimate kind of welcoming, super sensitive. Certain kind of insect needs to smell over 3 kilometers away another insect. We don't know why the bees are dying, so now we attach little radios on top of them. Here's a poor bee trying to fly with a radio. Here's an ant walking around with a radio. Here's the pill that you can now swallow that will monitor the inside of your body, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. And there, of course, is a part of our body which is now in interstellar space. Now, just to get back to the original point that Beatriz was making about the unbelievable sense in which we live in design, to such an extent that planet Earth is now a kind of almost minor experiment within that world. That's the world that we live in. So this was, let's say, one kind of flash from this little yellow book. It's a sort of flash that says the human is only human by virtue of design, and design is actually what designs the human, and we are therefore always suspended in a kind of radical question. The human species is the species, the only species that says of itself, what am I? Right? It's the only confused species. Have you ever seen a cat confused about itself? No, the cat is very clear. You need to serve the cat. Right? The dog says, it's very clear, I serve you. But the dog doesn't say, what is a dog? Right? And we are always saying, what is human? And design is the way we ask that question. Right? Something like that. Anyway, that's from the kind of beginning of the argument, much more elegant, much more interesting from the end. Beatriz.
So many millions of years back, I'm just going to go into actually modernity to demonstrate to you, I hope, that design is an aesthetic. And how we do that, I mean, we can go back to the arguments that probably you know very well about the elimination of ornament. And the interesting thing, and I'm going to read from the book, at Marcel didn't do, is that the elimination of ornament in the case of adult clothes is not at all an aesthetic choice. It's not I like it better without ornament. It's actually, if you read it carefully, a neurological or even a narcotic one. Laws argue that we no longer have the nerve to eat, dress, and decorate as in previous centuries. Modern man has a whole new set of nerves with completely different sensitivities. In fact, in 1926, he gave a series of lectures in La Sorbonne, as you can say, in Paris. The lectures were all in German. The man with the modern nerves. And on modern fields, he argues very similarly to what he had argued in a text that for sure you have read, which is Ornament and Crime, where he speaks of his horror, of his nausea, in front of all the decorated animals, he says, in culinary displays, particularly if he thinks he has to eat one of these stuffed animals' corsets. And then when you think he's going to say, well, I'm a vegetarian or something, he says, I only eat roast beef. Right? So the kind of abstraction of meat that is roast beef, where you cannot distinguish these animals. He feels the same nausea, exactly the same nausea in front of his banquets with all these animals, in the face of excessive ornament in architecture or in design. He says, we don't have anymore the steady nerve to drink from an elephant's ivory cask on which an Amazon bottle has been engraved, right? So we cannot stand anymore this situation. So the rejection of ornament for him then is a physiological reaction, as he put it in many texts. He talks about the nerves of the modern man that rebels against the demand to go back 20 or 50 or 100 years. He argued that the whole biology of man had evolved to give modern man a whole new set of nerves. Right? And here you have a portrait of Adolf Loos by Kokoschka, in which you can already see that he's actually a very nervous man. Look at his hand, right? And this is actually his close friend Karl Kraus, and also you can see in these drawings how nervous both of them are. In Karl Kraus, precisely here you have Karl Kraus, great friend of Adolf Loos, and his famous magazine Die Fackel, who he was editing in around the turn of the century. In Karl Kraus, Walter Benjamin writes, Robert Shaw, and I have to say that Robert Shaw was the brother of Gustav Shaw, who is the client of his famous house, very controversial house of Adolf Loos in Vienna in 1912. Controversial, why? Controversial because there is no ornament, you can say. This is a blank facade, somehow covered now with plants, but in fact, in this moment when it was built in 1912, totally polemical for his lack of ornament. Anyway, go back to Walter Benjamin writing about Karl Kraus. Karl Kraus, writes Robert Shaw, discovered a great subject that had never before set in motion the pen of a journalist, the rights of the nurse. The rights of the nurse. He became an advocate of the nurse, but the subject grew under his hand to become the problem of private life. So we now have that in philosophy, there is also this continuous preoccupation with the question of the nurse. Private life, he says that it became the problem of private life. Private life, in fact, the interior became this newly fragile, like that of the nervous individual, analyzed, of course, by psychoanalysis, or the vulnerable body of the tuberculosis patient that here is totally wrapped up in white to be prepared for hydrotherapy. Everybody becomes a child or a patient needed to be wrapped in this kind of soft lining. It is as if the new nerves are so new that the modern individual has only just been born and is a protected incubator to survive, to gain the necessary strength. You can argue that Loos' architecture is precisely such an incubator, a kind of incubator to protect this modern nervous individual that emerges with metropolitan life. Loos himself was very fragile. He suffered numerous nervous and physical disorders throughout his life, and at the end he checked himself into a sanatorium run by his friend, the psychiatrist Dr. Schwarzman in Karlsruhe, where he died in 1933. A year before, in case this was, you thought that this was a weird scene of Adolf Loos, Bucky Fuller had included nerve shock-proofing, not shock-proofing or I don't know, flood-proofing, but nerve shock-proofing as a list of the basic requirements for all his houses. Likewise, Friedrich Kiesler and Richard Neutra will develop entire theories of design based on the nerves. It is as if the nerves themselves were the true clients of modern architecture and design. I mean, you can think that, I mean, it's this funny thing that we are talking about laws, who is Viennese, and then Kistler, another Viennese, and then Neutra, another Viennese, again, superimposed the design of the Lowell House with this figure of the man, and he constantly talks about the man. Well, they are emerging from this context at the turn of the century. This is the Burgersdorf sanatorium. We were talking at glance about this confusion at the turn of the century between the treatment of tuberculosis and the treatment of nervous disorders of the metropolis. The Burgersdorf, in fact, affected clients with all kinds of disorders. Here you have Muller, Arnold Schoenberg, even writers like Formafantasma, but even the architect of the building, Joseph Hoffman, or the designer of the furniture, Colomon Moser, here, check themselves in regularly into the sanatorium. So the sanatorium has become this new space for the bourgeoisie and the intelligentsia, where people will check themselves voluntarily. Some of them have tuberculosis, others have these nervous disorders, unspecified nervous disorders. Maybe some of them come out of the sanatorium with tuberculosis, and everybody is like kind of surprised that that would happen, because they didn't actually think that it was a contagious disease. Here is Colomon Moser, which I don't know what he was suffering from, but also he designed this wonderful furniture of the Burgersdorf, and he also kept checking himself in and out of this sanatorium. By the way, Hoffman, the architect, had suffered from a nervous breakdown before the commission of the Burgersdorf, and he said that by his biographer that it was this experience that convinced him that maybe he should be the architect of this building. It's kind of interesting. I don't have time to go into this detail of this, but in fact, Modern was such a kind of an important placebo for these nervous disorders that all these people that take themselves into the Burgersdorf seem to have kind of experienced some sort of a renewal. The question of the nerves is also in Vienna, very important with Camillo Sitte. Camillo Sitte, in my view, suffered from agoraphobia, otherwise I don't explain how he writes this text, this famous text about design of the city according to artistic principles. He's constantly talking about things that, if you think about it, are not quite normal. You don't have a private experience of that. He talks about the fear of the modern individual to cross the street, because these long avenues that modern architecture is bringing, particularly criticizing Otto Wagner and all these immense avenues. And he talks about the modern individual suffering from agoraphobia. I think he did himself suffer from agoraphobia, and he starts producing or designing these spaces like very much like in medieval times, very much like here in Siracusa. Protect the individual, they act like an individual, and protect this nervousness of the modern individual. Well, in case you thought that this was a kind of completely Viennese hang-up, think, for example, about Paul Scherber, who also writes in his famous glass architecture, sanatoria also will want glass buildings. The influence of splendid glass architecture on the nerves is indisputable. So even glass is supposed to be actually presented, no, I like it better, it's modern, it's a new technology. No, it's good for the nerve. So it's for me astonishing how many of the arguments in favor of modern design do not have anything to do with what we are always talking about, like new materials, new techniques, blah, 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 transparency, I don't know what, but it has to do with this is important because we need to protect our nerves, right? And the whole thing continues after World War II, sorry. You have here, for example, a cover of the Architecture Review, but in particular I want to focus on the work of Charles André Eames, which define design itself as a shock absorber. Now, I have there many definitions of design, including the ones that we provided here, but the idea that design is a shock absorber is very shocking, right? So he was, of course, involved, there were both of them involved during the war in the military production of these leg splints and body cells for injured soldiers. Shock absorbers, indeed, for a traumatized body. They developed these splints and they make a factory, etc., etc. But perhaps more interesting, when they do their own house, they talk the house itself, they say, must not make many insistent demands for itself, but rather act as backgrounds for life in work and as a reorientator and shock absorber. I'm sure you have heard a lot of techniques about what a house is, protection from the elements, and all these things, right? Okay, listen to this. Reorientator and a shock absorber. That's what a house is. You want to tell me who is disoriented here and what is this shock that we need to absorb right now? So the interior becomes this showroom, as you know, very much full of objects. So it's absorbed in a way through the consumption of design. But what is this shock again? And then it turns out that, of course, after World War II, domestic life can no longer be taken for granted. This is a bomb shelter, very typical in the United States. This was published, for example, in Life magazine, at the time in which all Americans have their beautiful house with a garden and a pool or whatever. Above ground and underground, they have a shelter. They were encouraged, very much American, right? Instead of having like municipal bomb shelters like in Europe, you have the responsibility. All the government did is this to the manual, you construct your own shelter, right? And so this is a family that has built their own shelter and it's full of, they put all the kids in charge. This is the librarian, the other one is with the blanket, this one is in charge of the technology, of course, the boy, and all this food, etc. So very much American good life is operating on two levels with the happy, joy above, and they actually hiding the terror that is underneath. A little bit like Siracusa, you have two levels, right? Above and below. So the shock, of course, in the post-war is the shock of nuclear annihilation. And good design, and these are, of course, the exhibitions, of the famous exhibitions of good design in the Museum of Modern Art, where you have Ray Eames there, Charles and Ray Eames participated in them, offers good life, which is a galaxy of happy, self-contained objects for people who actually do not feel self-contained at all, safely contained, and cannot be sure of life itself. The Eames perfected the keep smiling strategy. Perhaps no other designers can be smiling so often and so polemically, particularly if you think about the previous generation of designers. You never see Le Corbusier smiling, or Mies smiling. Think about Adolf Lohr. I mean, they are always smiling. Whatever they do, there they go. Now here they are doing some ornaments with cutouts of the leftover splints, or the Mathematica exhibition, or the first version of your house, and they are always here, like in an advertisement of Hollywood. And if you compare with the previous generation, the ever-scrolling Adolf Lohr, even more dramatic in here, you think that something actually has happened, right? Okay, very quickly I move into Le Corbusier, so that you see that this idea that design is an aesthetic is not a kind of strange thing of Adolf Lohr. Because Le Corbusier, and these are images that he published in his magazine, The Spring Nouveau, here is actually the equipment of a dentist, precisely. And Le Corbusier also sees these smooth surfaces of modern architecture that he's advocating as an anesthetic. He says, to the nerves shattered in the aftermath of war. So he's again talking about war and the nerves after the war. At the same time, he says that, he says, not me saying it, Le Corbusier says that actual anesthetics, particularly cocaine, he says, are being peddled in the streets of Paris. Cocaine, of course, was one of the first substances that was used as an anesthetic for surgery on the recommendation of Freud in 1884. So you can say that the history of modern anesthetics uncannily parallels the development of modern architecture and design. The first public demonstration of an operation under anesthesia, what you see on the screen, in Massachusetts General Hospital in 1846. Anesthesia is, of course, the removal of the feeling, the temporal suppression of the central nervous system in order to achieve lack of sensation. Aesthetics come from the Greek, have everything to do with sensation. Actually, you don't think about it that way, but originally, in the term of the Greek, has everything with sensation, with protection by bodily feeling, and nothing at all to do with the intellect or the ideal until the 19th century. So this idea that we now have of aesthetics is totally wrong. But what is interesting here is the modern idea of aesthetics as a branch of philosophy is contemporary with the age of industrialization then. Aesthetics in the modern sense is itself therefore an anesthetic. It has removed all bodily sensation of feeling. The shock of the war after this is after World War II, of course, in London, the Foreign House that is completely destroyed after an air raid, and you have these people, like if nothing is happening, checking in the book, they are anesthetized in a way. You can check in the library, at least they were not in a completely destroyed building, but still World War I, where people were actually anesthetized. The shock of the war, the shock of the machine, the shock of the metropolis have in common anesthesia, the temporary removal of feeling, whether physical or psychological. In a text that you probably know, very beautiful text of Walter Benjamin called Experience and Poverty, Walter Benjamin writes about people returning from World War I, poorer in experience, unable to communicate, silent, in shock, after feeling the full force of modern technology. A generation, he writes, that had gone to school in horse-drawn streetcars now stood in the open air amid a landscape in which nothing was the same except the clouds, and at its center is a force of destructive torrents and explosion, the tiny, fragile human being. So in the middle of all these chaos, in the middle of all these destruction is this tiny, fragile, shocked, mute, incapable of speaking human being. Feeling was no longer possible after World War I. Humans were anesthetized. This poverty of experience finds its parallel, Walter Benjamin writes, in glass and steel buildings on whose smooth surfaces the inhabitant cannot leave any traces, any memory. In his writings of Baudelaire, Benjamin speaks of the smile of the passersby in the metropolis. Keep smiling. Remember the Walter Benjamin of the keep smiling? And think about the inns and the keep smiling. So it's the same idea, right? Benjamin is talking about after World War I, but it's very interesting that in the United States after World War II you have the same experience. They are in shock, they keep smiling, right? So, and a smile that Benjamin already says protects these shocked individuals from the unprecedented number of close encounters with strangers by developing this mimetic tactic. So Benjamin is talking about the beginning of the metropolis and the encounter for the first time of people with millions of people, of thousands of people, they have no idea who they are. And they develop this tactic of like, I smile, therefore, look at how much the Americans smile, right? Nobody in the world smiles so much, they're more shocked than any other people. Modern design, likewise, is a shock absorber. Its frozen smile very hiding the terror it tries to cover over. And with that, I go very quickly to what I will call in this book the design of health. Because design, in fact, is medicine. With classical theories of the Greek polis follow theories of the four humors, you can argue that contemporary ideas of health organize design theories today. For example, Vitruvius in the 1st century BC already launched Western architectural theory by insisting that all architects needed to study medicine. Now, I don't know whether there are students of architecture here. Are there architectural students of architecture here? Yeah? There are? You are not? Nobody studied architecture here? Yeah, you did, right? So how hard it was, right? Now imagine that you also have to study medicine because it's not enough, right? Because the most important thing for an architect or for a designer is the human body. So you really need to part to understand the question of health. And in fact, the first book of Vitruvius is very much dedicated to the question of health, giving very incredible detailed instructions on how to determine the healthiness of a particular site by sacrificing an animal that lives there and inspecting the liver to see whether it's sound and firm, and if it is sound and firm, then you can have a city there. So he sees architecture very much as a branch of medicine. Likewise, as Renaissance schools start to translate the Vitruvius, you have these images here. But also it's very interesting that the schools of architecture, the first school of design, the Academy of the Disegno in Florencia of 1563, the first, in fact, technically the first school of design, you know, at that time they would place themselves next to the schools of medicine. Why next to the school of medicine? You can say they have the same problem. How do you bring a building inside another building so that you can study the building, or how you can bring a body inside a building when in fact the church and all the prohibitions about dissection created a huge problem for the schools of medicine. So they start creating casts of body parts and of building parts at the School of Design, copying the School of Medicine. You know, a tradition that lasted into the 20th century. These images are actually from MIT, first School of Architecture in the United States, and still in the late 19th century they have many casts of building types. But it's also super interesting that the students in the Academia del Diseño were forced to attend dissection in the hospital nearby, even as the body was decomposing, and people are reporting that the students were getting sick, even the professors were getting sick, and nevertheless they have to sit there drawing this decomposed, and so they have to learn about dissection. In Leonardo da Vinci, you can see cutaway views of architectural interiors that sometimes are actually in the same page as anatomical drawings. He understood the interior of the brain and of the womb in architectural terms as enclosures that must be cut through to reveal their secrets, as you can see in this particular image. So the central reference for architecture, despite all these things that you see in the manuals of his mostly name, very healthy, very is not a whole body, but on the contrary, a kind of cut body, a dissected body, a fragmented and analyzed body. So when you move through here you have another example of those. But anyway, moving very quickly through the centuries, in the 19th century, you can see Viollet-le-Duc, which has become very important actually after the fire in Notre Dame. You probably have heard about it, that he wrote in his dictionary Raisonné with his perspectival cutaways views of medieval buildings, and he had been very much influenced also by Cuvier and his lessons of compared anatomy, that you need actually to analyze a building by treating it like a body that has to be cut in order to be understood. Right. Okay, so as medical representations change, we get to the 20th century, and it's precisely the widespread use of X-rays that made a new way of thinking about architecture possible. Even buildings, as you can see here, in this famous building of Mies van der Rohe for the glass skyscraper of 1922, start to appear as if it was a medical image with transparent glass walls revealing the inner secrets of the building. The architecture of the early 20th century cannot be understood outside tuberculosis and its kind of dominant technical diagnosis tool, which is the X-ray. By the way, this is a portrait. Actually, the X-ray was so popular that people, like first the aristocracy and the tsarins of Russia, and everybody will commission a portrait of their hand. The symptoms of modern architecture seem to be taken, the symptoms, if not the principles of modern architecture, appear to be taken completely from a medical test on the disease. A year before this guy, the German microbiologist Robert Koch discovered the tubercle bacillus, and this is the paper that he wrote. A standard medical book on tuberculosis gave as the cause of tuberculosis, among other things, lack of exercise, that's the cause of tuberculosis, a voluntary indoor life, sedentary indoor life, defective ventilation, and deficiency of light. So, and depressive emotions. So again, another thing, depressive emotions. So tuberculosis was thought for a long time, even if they have discovered the tuberculosis bacillus, He was thought to be a wet disease produced by damp cities. Here is Le Corbusier, for example, arguing that historic Paris is tubercular Paris, and this is producing tuberculosis. And somehow you needed to offer health by providing exactly a change of environment. 19th century architecture was all of a sudden kind of demonized as unhealthy. Think about the Wissenschaftskolleg theater room, the poster. Like this is 19th century, full of couches, full of draperies. This is not. This is. We have to cross it over. That's tuberculosis. This is healthy. The house has been elevated from the humid ground. People exercise in the terraces. People exercise in the living room. Exercise is everywhere. People are naked in the terrace. People jump into pools. The architects themselves give example. This is Duker, actually, the architect of the Sonnenstraße, jumping into a pool whose legs are behind him, but he's jumping on a pond to demonstrate that actually we need to be healthy. That goes hand in hand with modern architecture. In that sense, the publicity campaign of modern urban architecture can be said to be organized around contemporary beliefs about tuberculosis and fears of the disease. In this film that Le Corbusier did, I don't know whether you know him, I think it's online now, it's called Architektur Urduin. It was made with, in collaboration with a very young filmmaker, Archaeology. Le Corbusier argues that disease bleeds in the city because in the 20th century people still lived like in medieval ages. We saw that picture before, and here he's making the argument that we have to cut all of that, right? Cut it out, make surgery, right? And he explicitly equates disease with disorder in the city, and his solution is cut through the fabric of the city and exercise in the roof garden. Of course, nobody seems to know anything about sun cancer, and then a whole generation will go around like, okay, is this good, or should I just take it out, or you know what I mean? So every age has its own diseases and its own paranoia. The film makes this tour of the city, of these villas in the 1920s, emphasizes once again the value of sunbathing and exercising, culminating with its exercises in the roof garden, with kind of this Russian moment, a crazy moment of the house when he himself is exercising. The house is very much a machine for health, a form of therapy. Le Corbusier himself had been completely obsessed with health. Arriving in Paris from his small town in Switzerland, he complained about feeling exhausted all the time until he met some Dr. Winter that actually convinced him that when you are tired, what you should do is not rest, but actually exercise. So he started playing basketball together with him every day or every other day, and then he also introduced him to swimming. Right? And actually this Pierre Winter turned out to be kind of a shady character. He became actually a contributor to L'Esprit Nouveau, and he was actually in the Corps Nouveau, where he made this whole idea that the modern body is a body that exercises, right? But as I say, Winter is kind of a shady character. For example, in this article, Le Corps Nouveau, he writes, let us put our personal life in order, our social life in order. He talks about order all the time. And he turns out to be an enthusiast of the authoritarian wing of the syndicalist movement in France and a follower of Valois, who was the self-proclaimed French Mussolini. And in 1926, he writes about Le Corbusier and says, only a strong program of urbanism, the program of a fascist government, is capable of adapting the city to the needs of all. And here you have some of these articles, and Le Corbusier giving also a demonstration of his cousin Pierre Winter of how to boxing in the beach, and the whole Esprit Nouveau is full of images of this exercise, outcross, dancing, etc. Every age, to conclude, has its signature afflictions, and every affliction you can say that has its architecture. The age of bacterial diseases, particularly tuberculosis, gave birth to modern architecture, to white buildings detached from the humid ground where disease breeds. The association of tuberculosis with modern architecture is so incredibly strong that still in 1952 you can see this cover of the Revista Nacional de Arquitectura of Madrid, yeah? And you can see that the modern building is superimposed not only with an image of the sun but also with an X-ray of the land. So it's not something that I'm making up. In fact, I just wrote a book about the X-ray. I don't understand why nobody wrote it before, because it's completely obvious that modern architecture was a response to the great threat that tuberculosis was to that generation. And here you have again very quickly, I'm not going to go into this, Paimio Sanatorium with all these people on the terrace and Paimio and the rooms, which in fact when you look at them, in fact very much you can say, well, this is obviously a room in a sanatorium, but if they tell you some room in a modern house, you will also believe it. And this is a kid. In northern countries where there not enough sun, they were made to pass by this kind of, how do you call these machines for this? That now they say they give skin cancer, infrared rays, and all the kids in school will pass. This is in France, but in many northern countries even more. They will make them pass through these machines to get the sun. Well, as I say, every age has its own affliction, and they gave the age of bacterial diseases gave birth to modern architecture. The discovery of antibiotics, and particularly streptomycin, that took a long time to find an antibiotic that was effective for tuberculosis, put an end to that era. And the post-war years, attention started to be paid to psychological problems. The very same architects like Neutra here, who had advocated that this lower house was preventing tuberculosis and have collaborated with Dr. Lowell to create this idea, and outside every bedroom there was a sleeping log where you can sleep outside and everything. It starts all of a sudden to say that the architect is not just a doctor but as a shrink. Because all this medication, I don't know what this is doing here, but the architect is a shrink. And the house is not just a medical device for the prevention of disease, but for providing psychological comfort, what Neutra called precisely nervoscapy. The 20th, and here Neutra was also very close to William Wright, and there were these orgone machines that were in each house of Neutra that was supposed to make you more potent sexually and everything, but it was also very good to cure nervous disorders. And every house of Neutra had one of these orgone machines that became very famous with that film of Woody Allen. Remember the what he called it? The orgasmatron, no? Eh? Orgasmatron, right? Because they were very popular in California, and I don't know whether they were good for the nurse, but they were definitely very good for sexual potency, so they became very popular. So this is one of the houses in which Neutra destroyed house, which was also, by the way, they were all experimenting with heroin at that time, which was not illegal. There was a salon for, and so the whole connection of modern architecture and drugs. It's also a very interesting chapter of this story, but I'm not going to go into this. I'm going to go back to our times, because in fact, if this evolution from tuberculosis to the psychological problems after tuberculosis being controlled by antibiotics, we see the house is supposed to protect you from psychological problems. Then we go to today, which is the era, in a way, of the neurological disorders, you can say. According to Han, for example, have you read this book called The Burnout Society? It's a book of Han, this Korean writer, that talks of the 21st century, the age of the neurological disorders, depression, ADD, borderline personality disorders, burnout syndrome, etc. And then the question is, what is the architecture of this affliction? What does it mean for design? So if architecture and design, if medicine and design have always been connected, in the age of these disorders, what is the architecture will be my question. But also, is the age of extreme allergies the age of the environmentally hypersensitive and able to live in the modern world? Never at any one point in history have been so many people that are allergic to chemicals, to buildings, to electromagnetic fields, to fragrances, etc., etc. Since the environment is now almost completely man-made, we have become, in a way, allergic to ourselves, to our own hyperextended body in a kind of autoimmune disorder. They are now, according to this author, Dodi Bellamy, communities of the afflicted living in a kind of replay of the 1960s, in bubbles, tents, and all cars that have been completely cleaned up of all toxic materials, usually in the desert or far away from civilization, nomads that move away at the very sniff of a chemical coming from a shifting wind that brings whiff of industry, detergent, fabric softeners, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, etc. As though they belong the achievement subject, who turns to be much more disciplined, in fact, that the obedient subject, despite the fact that they obey only himself. So the environmental hypersensitive are not mentioned by Han, perhaps because he considers them, as many in the medical establishment, afflicted by neurological disorders, depressed, or hypochondria. The seemingly opposite symptoms might be two sides of the same coin. But the point for all of this for us is that implied in all these new kinds of disorders is in fact a different city and a new question for design, or a very ancient question in fact, about the limits of the body and the mind, and how to take shelter in a threatening world. Thank you very much.